Okay, this is always one of those discussions I've really wanted to have over the years. And just to let you know, there's going to be one of those videos where I just hop on camera and talk about what I really want to talk about. So it's not going to be like a let's play style format today, or even one of those video essays I promised. But believe me, we're working towards that. We are working towards that, right? I want this to be a channel to where it has like some sort of variety, and this is just one of those things, right? And so I've had this discussion with someone I know pretty well on Twitter, and I thought I'd make a video out of it. I am strongly under the belief that if you don't actually play a game, you're not really allowed to take part in gaming discourse. Let me explain to you what I mean by that, right? Let's take Resident Evil 2 for example, right? It's one of those games to where, you know, you've kept up with the lore, you've watched so many of your favorite YouTubers play those games, you love it for the scares, right? Whatever the case may be. However, when the time comes when the game's actually released, you want to take part in actually joining the discussion revolved around the game. This is where the problem comes in, right? Because you have to understand, in this day and age, there's a difference between people who have watched YouTubers play the game and people who have actually played the game itself. And just as a disclaimer before I actually get into the larger discussion, games like visual novels, I think, get a pass. Games like Edith Finch, Life is Strange, The Wolf Among Us, decision-based games where like the story is like the main part of the game, you know what I mean? Those games somewhat get a pass because I guess if you've seen the story for yourself, then it's okay to talk with other people about the game and sort of exchange ideas that way. But even then, right, as someone who loves Life is Strange, I played Life is Strange, Before the Storm, 2, True Colors, like I've played all the games. And even then, as someone who had watched them first and then played the games, there's still a distinct difference between the two experiences. And so while I do believe visual novels are sort of the only exception to this rule, even that has like a little caveat. So with that out of the way, let's really get into it. I mentioned earlier Resident Evil 2. This to me is the clearest example of why I believe if you haven't really played the games, participating in gaming discourse just feels kind of hollow. Anything you say sort of gets taken with a grain of salt. Nothing will ever compare to the sound design of Resident Evil 2. Let me let you in on a little secret, right? I hate horror games. I hate horror movies. I hate horror novels. I hate horror novels. But as someone who wanted to get into the genre, right, Resident Evil was my first doorway into that series, into that genre, right? Lo and behold, I didn't actually even buy the game. My cousin game shared it to me and said, yo, you know, I have Resident Evil 2, you want it? And I said, sure, why not? I played it and I absolutely loved it. I will never be able to describe in what's going to end up probably a 10 to 15 minute video about the masterful sound design in RE games. Just taking Resident Evil 2 for now, right? The clicking of the broken lights, the opening of the doors in the police station, right? Leon's footsteps, the sounds of zombies around the corner, right? The reloading of your gun, the aiming of your gun, the heft of Leon's movements as he runs. It's all part of the horror experience. You have to understand that. As you're walking through these halls where there are no lights, right? It's not like the main hub of the police station where everything's well lit. It's when you go down those dark corridors, the rain outside, the silent footsteps of the zombies around the corner. Every little piece of sound within these environments adds another layer of horror to the experience, another layer of fear. And so as someone who watches that, I don't think you're getting the full experience. Let me tell you the difference. It is a completely different game when you as a player have to think to yourself, okay, the next time I run into a zombie, am I going to shoot him? Am I going to run away? Where do I have to go to now that I just got a couple of these items, a couple of these keys? All these things are going on in your head as you're experiencing the horror. We still have a game to play, mind you. So not only are you thinking about the objectives in the game, right, or possibly some goodies that you could end up getting because of the key items you received, but you're also thinking about, oh snap, like this is still a horror game. I still have to watch out or I'm gonna get my shit cooked. These are all the things the players have to think about. But when you're watching someone play the game, half of that element is taken away. Just another element of horror that really isn't talked about a lot in Resident Evil games, and honestly a lot of horror games, limited resources. Limited resources can also be considered an aspect of horror, especially in some of the harder difficulties of Resident Evil. Like, I'm walking down a hallway and I'm like, dude, I only got like 3 bullets. If somebody pop around that corner, that's my ass. And especially in Resident Evil 2, where like zombies will lunge and they'll go the distance of like 15 yards, right? You really have to be careful with your surroundings. So that's just another level of fear, thinking that like, damn, if I really get into a fight, I might not be able to fight back, or I might have to take another route completely to avoid some enemies. Let's take Lickers for an example, right? Lickers obviously are drawn to sound. And how terrifying is it the first couple times you run through that one hallway on the left side of the police precinct where there's that licker right there, and you're like, do I do a flashbang at him? Do I shoot him first? Do I think I can take him out? Should I just walk by him? These are things that add fear to the experience. The player thinks about this. The viewer of the YouTube videos of the guys playing this kind of stuff, you don't think about this. And I think that takes away a lot of the experience. Now, I'm not here to shame people for obviously watching their favorite YouTuber play a game. As, you know, I understand that not a lot of people these days have the ability to buy all these different horror games the second they release. We're all living different situations. And that's not to say that I want you to be completely excluded from all gaming discourse, right? I'm just saying whenever the larger crowd of certain communities have big discussions around games, Resident Evil, Sonic even, right? Pretty much anything, your opinion has to be taken with a grain of salt because you haven't played the game. You watch somebody play it. And honestly, even visual novels, when people are just like, oh no, I watched Life is Strange 2, it's not that great. I'm like, but you didn't play it. You didn't play the game. Life is Strange 2 is one of those experiences where it's like when you make certain choices, especially since most of the choices you make as Sean in that game heavily affect Daniel, right? And if you, the player, don't feel that sense of regret when telling Daniel to do something and he eventually does, takes your words and sort of, you know, as a child naturally does, misconstrues them and doesn't apply them to the situation, like you feel that guilt for saying shit like that to him. It's a completely different experience. And that's what I mean by like your opinion sort of had to be taken with a grain of salt when you enter larger gaming discussion. Once again, this especially applies to horror games. For games like RE2 to RE3 to RE5 to RE7 to RE8, right? All these new REs that are coming out, right? Ever since Resident Evil 2. I've played all of them, right? And if I had to rank them, I prefer the more horror-styled RE in comparison to those that prioritize action, right? So RE2 and RE7 are some of my favorites in comparison to like RE8 and RE4. But regardless, playing them all to completion, by the way, and this is sort of like the second caveat I'll make for the video. If you've mostly played a game, you get a pass. Like for example, if you've played all of RE4 but like the final boss fight, then like you mostly gotten what you've needed to get from the game to fully understand what the experience is about. And at that point, what you have to say in a gaming discussion, I would love to hear. Missing out on one fight isn't going to detract from the validity of your statement when you're talking about a specific game, right? It's one fight. And if you've played the other, 20 some hours of RE4, I'll take your word for it. And this discussion that we're having sort of reminded me of something I experienced a long time ago. I was arguing with someone who really loved Sonic Adventure 2, and I hate Sonic Adventure 2. So like we were arguing back and forth and he was just like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Eggman and Tails are the best part of Sonic Adventure 2. And it made me think in the back of my head, there's no way. Like the only two explanations for this absolutely goofy ass statement is that number one, you've either never played this game and just watched somebody else play it and just automatically assume, oh, that looks pretty fun. Or you want to defend this game as much as humanly possible, so you're glorify anything about it. Either way, you looked mad goofy. Once again, this is one of those videos that's meant to make people feel bad that, oh, I haven't played the game so I can't talk about them. You technically can do whatever you want. I'm just saying, when I'm talking to someone about a specific game, I take your opinion with a grain of salt if you haven't actually played the game, right? Like for example, Sleeping Dogs. I have not played Sleeping Dogs, right? But someone would be like, oh, it's pretty fun. Oh, how would you know? It's a completely different answer when someone says, oh, like I watched Burleezy play it, in comparison to, oh, I played the game. It's like, wow, it's really, really fun. I think you're really gonna enjoy it. Once again, right? Like I can look at Sonic 06 and say to myself, oh, that looks like a pretty bad unfinished game. But as someone who actually bought the game back in 2006 and 2007, to me, your opinion would matter a lot more because number one, you not only played the game, but you played it in an era to where like the full brunt of its incomplete and just garbage nature of a game would have really hit you. Once again, like as someone who also watches a ton of YouTube content, right? And you've probably heard me say this over a bunch of my platforms. I am a viewer first. I've always considered myself a viewer first. I make content, stream. I'm very multifaceted when it comes to this content making game, right? Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, all that kind of stuff. I watch more than anything. I've watched the AVGNs. I've watched the Scott the Wazes, and I've watched the Jontrons and the Burleezys and the Afro Senjus and the Caleb Cities, right? Like I've consumed an abundance of content over, I don't know, 10 years now. I myself have watched so many Let's Plays. Like if you remember, Chugga Conroy was like the king of this shit. Still probably is, right? He's making 70, 100 part Let's Plays, slicing a game down to like its components and really breaking it down to people. Like for example, even watching some people play some games have inspired me to actually play them, right? Corey Kenshin's a perfect example. Like Corey inspired me to play horror games. And even back in the day, like me talking about Resident Evil probably didn't mean as much because I didn't play the game. And one day I was just like, it. I want to play the game. Same thing with like my Chuck Conroy example, right? Like when I watched him play Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, and I'm just like, oh, I want to play that, and I did. And it ended up being my favorite game of all time. So like the influence that some of these YouTubers have is very real, right? Experience the game yourself. Just because you've watched somebody play it doesn't mean that you've really gotten everything you could out of that game. And I myself actually encourage that you go and play games that you've watched YouTubers play. Like for example, I watched Berlin play like all seasons of The Walking Dead before I got to play the games, and it was enough time between me watching his playthroughs and me buying like the collection when it came out in college that I was like, I think this is like vague enough in my memory for me to still enjoy this, and I did. It was a wonderful experience. It was something that I was absolutely so proud of that I played, because it really tugs at your heartstrings when you actually play the games, when you're putting yourself in the shoes of Lee, who's supposed to be looking after Clementine as this like father figure. It's almost as if you yourself take on this role of being a father figure for Clementine. And then at the end of the journey, when you realize that this little girl has to grow up very fast and she eventually has to take the life of the person that she saw as a father at the time. Granted, you can feel it as a viewer, but it's nothing like playing it yourself, and you, the player, telling Clementine your last piece of advice before she has to take your life. As a player, it's different. Just different. Or when you get into contact with like AJ in season 5, right? It's sort of like that same parent role that Clementine takes on to AJ as Lee did for Clementine, right? And that progression throughout the series, right? That stuff is important. It's very important for the player because it adds to the experience. Just 2 examples from, novel, story-based games to like horror games. It's all relative, right? Play the games. Right? Play the games. I'll give you another example, right? Jedi Fallen Order, Afro Senju. I think played Jedi Fallen Order like, 2-3 years ago, right? I watched that playthrough like 9 times. I said to myself like, oh, like I pretty much got the gist of it. I watched Afro play it. No, I didn't. A couple years later, in fact, I think it was 3 months ago, if I could actually find it, give me 1 second. For some of y'all, I think that I'm bullshitting, like Afro Senju's playthrough, Fallen Order. Like, not a couple months later, it was actually a couple years later, I ended up getting Fallen Order because I was like, when Afro played it, it was mad fun, right? So I'm like, shit, why not play it for myself? I loved it. Even though, obviously, it came out a very long time ago. It's my favorite game I've played all year. I beat it this year, and we're pretty much halfway through the year, so it was, and Spider-Man 2 is probably going to take that spot anyway, but it was really fun. I loved it. And I'm like, oh my god, like, playing a lot of these boss fights on a hard difficulty, like, I understand completely why Afro Senju was so pissed at some of these fucking fights. The fucking, especially, I'm on Survivor right now, too, like, the Ogdo Bogdo fight. Like, I hate that thing. I hate that thing. I understand why he's so pissed at that stupid frog. It all makes so much sense when you play these games. You want to experience, right? Of course, when you don't have the means to get these games, have access to these games, the second best thing, obviously, is to watch someone play it. But if you have the opportunity, play these games. Whether you gotta emulate it, whether you gotta borrow it, just having your hands on these games and experiencing them is a completely different ball game. Like, for example, there are 3 games, and I talk about this all the time on my Twitch channel. There are 3 games that I wanted so bad at the time, right, when they all came out. And in fact, I don't think they all came out at the same time, but I think they were all released within like 2 years of each other. And like, I thought in the back of my head, when I run into some money and eventually just became, I want to say 12th grade, maybe to college, I bought them all at the exact same time. And so these games were Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Nier Automata, and Final Fantasy 15. These 3 games were games that I waited so long to play, right? All of them by trailers and stuff like that looked so cool to me that I'm like, when I run into some money, I'm gonna play all 3 of these. In fact, I was so inspired by all the promotional material with these 3 games that I had not looked up not one gameplay and or let's play of any of these games until I got my hands on them. Granted, made it an absolutely wonderful experience playing all these completely blind, right? In fact, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, although not my favorite Xenoblade game, the first time you play Xenoblade 2 blind is going to be one of your favorite experiences with Xenoblade games. I promise you, don't cheat yourself. In fact, that's probably going to be a video for another day. Just try to go in playing games blind and not looking up let's plays beforehand, but another video for another day. Yeah, so when I played all 3 of these games, I love Xenoblade 2, I love Nier Automata, but Final Fantasy 15 is a different discussion. I was finally able to participate in all the gaming discourse, the comparisons between games, comparison between main characters, comparison between gameplay styles, right? Especially pertaining to Xenoblade 2. I was able to really hold my own in a lot of these discussions because, like, experience the games, right? In fact, if you want to switch it up from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Final Fantasy 15. I still believe it's genuinely the most dog shit Final Fantasy game ever made, right? Still stand by it, because, didn't enjoy this one. And it started off pretty slow. Thought the world was really bland. The characters kind of sucked. They don't really grow beyond, you know, what the game shows them off to be within the first couple hours of the game. Ending sucks. Combat's really fun. Music's great, but that's pretty much about it. And I remember this vividly because I played the game. So if there's anything I want you to take away from this, right? And this video's probably way longer than it really should have been. Play games, man. Play the games. Once again, I know everyone's financial situation is not the same, but if you have the opportunity, right? Play the games. Because playing these games firsthand will give you a perspective that will really allow you to hold your own in a lot of these gaming discussions, right? And especially when you're talking about future games. When someone asks you, like, when you've played Xenoblade Chronicles 2, like, what do you think the series can improve upon? You might sit and think about it for a second. Oh, I think they can do this, this, and this. Because you've experienced it firsthand. That being said, this is pretty much the end of one of my think piece type videos. I love doing these, like just an idea that pops into my head and me getting onto the mic and recording and talking about literally whatever. I think this is like one step under like a video essay, which is what I'm really hoping to get to, because I love doing this because it's just an idea that came to me while I was like perusing Twitter. Like I can't wait to see what kind of like discussions pop up from a video like this. But yeah, so as always, like and subscribe if you haven't. Turn on that notification bell so you know when I post my videos, and I'll probably see you in the next Final Fantasy part, I think. Deuces.